Shalom, my friend. Busyness does not fail because people are weak. It fails because it is unsupported by structure. Most people believe that if they stay busy, life will eventually stabilize. They maintain their schedules, they fulfill their responsibilities, they push through their fatigue. They assume that constant motion will eventually create the stability they seek. Torah reveals a different law. What is not structured eventually collapses, no matter how busy it is. Motion without foundation does not build toward anything lasting. Activity without architecture creates the illusion of progress, while the very life you are working to build slowly deteriorates beneath the weight of your own efforts. This is not a moral failure. This is not weakness. This is structural law. I am Rabbi Shimon, the Torah life architect, translating ancient Torah design into modern clarity for serious people who understand that life requires more than good intentions and hard work. What I share with you is not motivation. This is not productivity advice. This is not hustle culture promising faster results through better techniques. This is architecture, the science of building lives that can sustain the weight of real responsibility without collapsing inward. Today, we enter phase 2 of our understanding, where we move beyond the foundation principles and examine why disciplined, responsible people still find their lives feeling unstable despite their best efforts. We will explore the critical distinction between activity and structure, between movement and actual construction. The core law that governs everything we will discuss is this: activity does not build. Structure builds. Most people confuse these two completely different processes. They assume that if they increase their activity, they will naturally create more structure. They believe that discipline equals structure, that effort equals stability, that staying busy equals making progress. This confusion is why so many good people feel exhausted, while their lives feel increasingly fragile. Structure precedes expansion. You cannot build outward until you have built inward. Structure absorbs pressure. Without proper internal architecture, every new responsibility becomes a threat to the entire system. Structure determines longevity. What is built to last can handle weight. What is not built to last will eventually crack under pressures that structured systems handle easily. Without structure, effort leaks. You work hard, but the results do not accumulate. Discipline exhausts. You maintain your habits, but they drain rather than strengthen you. Responsibility collapses inward. Instead of your capacity growing to meet your obligations overwhelm your capacity. This is the experience of millions of people who cannot understand why they feel so unstable, despite doing everything they believe they should do. We must distinguish clearly between concepts that most people treat as identical, but are actually completely different in their effects. Busy versus built. Busy means constant activity without architectural purpose. Built means deliberate construction that creates something capable of bearing weight. You can be extremely busy while building nothing that will stand. You can also build extensively while appearing much less busy than people who are constructing nothing. Movement versus progress. Movement is change in position. Progress is advancement toward a specific structural outcome. You can move constantly without making any progress. You can also make significant progress through movements that appear minimal to outside observers. Discipline versus structure. Discipline is the ability to maintain behaviors regardless of how you feel. Structure is the framework that makes those behaviors sustainable and cumulative. Discipline without structure eventually burns out. Structure without discipline never activates. Both are necessary, but structure must come first. Effort versus capacity. Effort is energy applied to tasks. Capacity is the ability to handle increasing loads without system failure. You can expend tremendous effort while actually decreasing your capacity. You can also build capacity through efforts that appear less intense but are architecturally sound. This is why many people experience full calendars but empty progress. They schedule their time completely, but nothing they do builds toward anything lasting. They experience constant responsibility, but no increasing capability to handle that responsibility gracefully. They feel emotionally fatigued despite getting things done, because their activity is not constructing anything that makes future activity easier or more sustainable. This happens not because of sin, not because of laziness, but because nothing is holding their effort together. Their activity lacks architectural coherence. They are moving individual stones rather than building an actual structure. Consider Joseph in Egypt, whose life illustrates the relationship between activity and structure with perfect clarity. Joseph was active long before he was stable. In Potiphar's house, he worked diligently and gained responsibility, but his position was entirely dependent on circumstances beyond his control. His activity was excellent, but it was not building anything that could withstand external pressure. When false accusations came, everything collapsed immediately. In prison, Joseph again demonstrated exceptional activity. He served well, interpreted dreams, helped others. But this activity, while admirable, still did not create structural stability. He remained completely dependent on the favor of others and the whims of circumstance. The transformation came when Pharaoh recognized not just Joseph's activity, but his structural capacity. Pharaoh was not looking for someone who could work hard. He was looking for someone who could build systems that would sustain an entire nation through crisis. Structure came before expansion. Joseph first established administrative architecture, distribution systems, storage protocols. Only after these structures were in place did the actual work of managing abundance and scarcity become manageable. Without that structural foundation, all the activity in the world would have failed when the pressure came. Authority plus order created resilience. Joseph's position was not based on popularity or even performance, but on his ability to create and maintain systems that worked independently of his personal involvement. The structure he built could function even when he was not directly managing every detail. Provision followed structure, not activity. Egypt prospered not because people worked harder, but because their work was organized within a framework that could handle both abundance and scarcity. The structure multiplied the effectiveness of the activity rather than competing with it. This illustrates design logic, not miraculous intervention. Joseph understood principles that allowed him to build something that could sustain weight. His contemporaries worked just as hard, but they were not building with structural awareness. From this understanding emerge three fundamental structural laws that govern how effort becomes lasting construction. The first law: structure must exist before weight is added. You cannot handle increasing responsibility without first building the internal capacity to process that responsibility. Adding obligations to an unstructured life does not create structure. It creates instability that eventually forces you to reduce your commitments to survive. The second law: what lacks form cannot sustain growth. Growth requires something solid to grow from. Without internal architecture, expansion becomes scattered activity that exhausts rather than strengthens. Form provides the container that allows growth to accumulate rather than dissipate. The third law: expansion without structure multiplies collapse. Every new responsibility, every additional obligation, every increased demand becomes a potential point of failure when there is no structural integrity to absorb the pressure. Instead of becoming stronger through challenge, unstructured systems become more fragile with each addition. These laws apply directly to modern life in ways that explain why good people feel increasingly overwhelmed despite their best efforts. In careers, people take on additional responsibilities, assuming that activity will eventually create advancement. But without building the structural capacity to handle complexity, each promotion becomes a threat to their stability rather than a step toward greater capability. In family responsibility, parents exhaust themselves trying to meet every need and manage every detail. But without creating family structures that can function independently of constant parental intervention, the family becomes more dependent and the parents become more drained with each passing year. In leadership roles, well-intentioned people assume more authority without building the internal architecture to process decision-making pressure. Instead of becoming stronger leaders, they become bottlenecks who limit the organization's capacity to function effectively. In financial stress, people work harder and longer, assuming that increased activity will create security. But without building financial structures that accumulate rather than just circulate money, they remain vulnerable to any disruption regardless of how hard they work. In spiritual busyness, sincere people engage in more religious activities, assuming that increased engagement will create spiritual stability. But without building the internal capacity to process spiritual reality, they become more anxious and dependent rather than more peaceful and grounded. This explains why good people burn out, why responsible people feel crushed, and why disciplined people still feel unstable. They are applying genuine effort within frameworks that cannot sustain the weight of their own success. The common objection is, but I'm doing everything right. You are applying effort correctly, but effort without structure does not build. You are being responsible, but responsibility without capacity creates unsustainable pressure. You are maintaining discipline, but discipline without architecture eventually exhausts itself. Another objection is, but I'm disciplined. Discipline is essential, but it's not sufficient. Discipline maintains behaviors. Structure makes those behaviors cumulative and sustainable. You can be extremely disciplined while building nothing that will stand under pressure. A third objection is, but I'm responsible. Responsibility is admirable, but taking on responsibility without building the capacity to handle it gracefully does not honor the responsibility. It reduces your effectiveness